Welcome to this presentation on Transatlantic Pedagogies. This work is presented by Professors Butragueño from the University of Texas in Arlington and María Salgado and Javier Raposo from the ETSAM in Madrid. This research compares two different approaches to early architectural design education on both sides of the Atlantic. The study is based on the analysis of two specific courses, Drawing Analysis and Ideation in Madrid and Design Communication in Texas. It is important to note that the first is a graphic course framed within the Department of Graphic Ideation, while the second is a first design studio where students encounter the beginning of their architectural studies. We will begin by exploring the transformations that took place at the School of Architecture in Madrid through the lenses of a graphic course that introduces students into early design. The School of Architecture in Madrid underwent a major transformation under the Bologna process, which materialized in 2010. The goal was to improve the competitiveness of the European higher education within the global academic context, especially in relation to the United States. In early design education, this represented the opportunity to reshape pedagogical methodologies. Previous academic plans relied heavily on prescriptive teaching methods that were centered on repetition, imitation, and technical perfection in order to produce measurable results. Classroom interactions were very unidirectional, based on a professor-to-student dynamic rather than collaborative group engagement. Following the Bologna process, pedagogy shifted towards a more creative and expressive approach in which students could take ownership in their processes, and collaboration became essential as a component of learning. These transformations also responded to a broader social demand for a multidisciplinary architect with a diverse and adaptable education. We have created this diagram to synthesize the different aspects that we're going to be analyzing in the research. You will always find the main goal, then the main difficulties that we have found, and then possible solutions, the different actions that are referred to, the participation ratio between professors and students, the pedagogical procedures that are applied, and the results that we obtained. First, let's talk about the first action, design drawing. Drawing evolved from a very representational tool into a thinking tool. This emphasis shifted from result to process. Students began with very expressive drawing practices that encourage experimentation and progressively moved towards a more analytical and synthetic form of drawing, where interpretation and conceptual understanding became central. The goal at the end of this semester is that the students are capable of approaching drawing as a process of a spatial inquiry, developed through positional architectural perspectives. This process encourages students to get their own graphic language and internalize drawing as a tool of ideation. Then the relationship between students and teachers is also transformed because it evolved from a pyramidal structure into a mentorship model in which students take ownership from the learning process and engage in self-discovery. The group collaboration became fundamental in this fundamental aspect in the studio culture. The overall goal was to move away from an individual approach towards methods that promote critical thinking and peer collaboration. Even at this early stage, it became important to emphasize architecture and the role of architects in the world. In terms of media, experimentation and gaining multiple skills became the central goals. By blurring the boundaries between analog and digital media, the process is no longer understood as a linear one, but rather as a continuous back and forth exchange that serves the project. Now we're going to briefly describe the different iterations developed through both semesters, which operate in continuity with one another. The first iteration of drawing analysis and ideation, one, is primarily based on expressive drawing and experimentation. The main goal is to challenge students' preconceived notions of what is a drawing and expose them to multiple techniques and modes of expression. They engage with open processes of graphic experimentation while exploring different levels of abstraction, from gestural, natural, architectural, lyrical, and geometric. In the second iteration, students are introduced to open processes of quantitative graphic construction. Here, the concept of space emerged through the contrast of light and shadow, light understood as gesture, the study of proportions and geometry, and the relationships between the whole and the different parts. Progressively, students begin analyzing intentional, relational, and positional space. The third iteration focuses on concepts of progress, evolution, and transformation. The work is mainly based on geometric evolutionary processes that seek spatial configurations. During the second semester, we continue exploring similar concepts, but now introducing context as a central component. This addition helps students build the narrative in the dimension of their design. The first exercise encouraged students to reflect on the city and transformative process within a very specific context through different graphic systems, drawing, class, models, photography. Students attempt to understand the site through an abstract and open-ended approach, repeating the cycle of expression, analysis, and synthesis. In the second iteration, the goal is to strengthen the imaginative dimension and the students' architectural production abilities in order to address the understanding of place with the greater graphic and conceptual precision. Students focus on the instrumental phase that develops skills related to process, transformation, and the operational manipulation of architectural projects. In the third iteration, students develop fundamental abilities associated with imaginative design. This helps them internalize the process inherent to architectural design, such as transformation, analytical manipulation, and operational decision-making. Now we're going to review the pedagogical approach and the curricular transformations developed at the School of Architecture at Kappa in the University of Texas in Arlington. This school has historically maintained a very strong emphasis on drawing, representation, and craftsmanship as foundational components of early architectural education. Over the past decades, influential educators and practitioners helped shape the pedagogical culture grounded in graphic precision, material understanding, and disciplined studio practice. This tradition has created a rigorous approach to visual communication and technical development within the first-year curriculum. The program is now undergoing a significant curricular transformation, trying to include early design education beyond representational skills towards broader forms of spatial thinking, conceptual exploration, and process-based learning. Drawings will continue to play a very central role, but the revised approach positions increasingly as a tool of investigation, speculation, and design inquiry. As a result, the first-year sequence becomes more explicitly project-oriented, integrating the learning of drawing skills within a wider pedagogical framework focused on early architectural design and spatial imagination. The course is based on a collaborative teaching model, both among instructors and between instructors and students. The main goal is not only to teach representational skills, but to teach students how to think architecturally through dialogue, experimentation, and critical thinking. Drawings play a very central role on both representation and exploratory elements that help students develop spatial ideas and new ways of understanding of architecture. The first-year curriculum focused on helping students understand this spatial hierarchy, design narratives, and fundamentals of orthographic and paraline drawings. Architectural drawing is introduced as a fundamental component of design thinking, rather than just a technical skill. By the end of the year, students are expected to have a more consistent skill set and greater confidence and agency in their design decisions. Analog drawing is understood as an essential tool for observation, reflection, and critical thinking in the early stages of design education. Digital tools are incorporated progressively as complementary media that expand and enrich the design process rather than replace traditional methods. The pedagogy encourages students to move fluidly between analog and digital workflows as part of an iterative and exploratory design process. The first year studio at UTA is highly structured at the beginning of the semester and gradually becomes more open-ended as the students develop greater confidence and autonomy. Projects typically evolve from small singular problems towards increasingly complex spatial and tectonic investigations. The first and second iterations are more guided than the third. In the first exploration, students are introduced to operations within a cube through subtraction of mass, because we think that is one of the most intuitive spatial operations, while also they are learning orthographic systems and architectural drawing conventions. The second exercise introduces architectural thinking through the manipulation of folded planes and the study of sectional space generated through dynamic surface operations. Students are also engaged in minimal programmatic requirements and also anthropometric considerations. In terms of drawing systems, they are introduced to perspective drawing. In the final project, students are asked to synthesize all the previous learning into the design of a very playful abstract pavilion situated within an artificial topography. They are not given a site or a program. They are just given a proto-site and a program. Drawing inspiration from the modular geometries of David Yumemoto, as well as from the work developed in the previous exercises, students produce a series of volumetric models. Through the transformation, iteration, and integration, these studies evolve into a cohesive architectural composition. The second semester also works as a continuation of the first, incorporating larger scales and also the concept of the narrative as one of the most important tools. Students are given significant agency within their decision-making process, and the emphasis shifts towards the implementation of creative thinking. First, students develop a research process focused on some of the most influential utopian urban projects of the 1960s and 70s. This analysis is mainly graphic, using drawing as a tool to understand and communicate the decision-making process behind these projects. In the second phase, students design their own utopian cities using present studies as reference for developing narrative frameworks. Narrative becomes a key component of the project, helping students anchor architectural ideas and spatial strategies. At this stage, projects are organized into two interconnected layers: stereotomic base, defining the city's grounding of the infrastructure, and a tectonic canopy developed above it, exploring the relationship between these two systems. In the third phase, the project returns to the idea of the narrative through the introduction of the spatial paradox of multidimensional space. That is inspired by the invisible cities and also the spatial constructions of M.C. Escher, where students develop imaginary architectural narratives using abstract architectural elements to create complex, multidimensional environments. By the end of the first year, students should be able to graphically communicate ideas clearly, verbally explain their design narratives, and confidently work through ambiguity without becoming paralyzed by the fear of making mistakes. Basically, this new early design curriculum is trying to expand the traditional emphasis on drawing and representation towards a broader understanding of spatial thinking and architectural agency, where narrative plays a very important role. We would like to finish with a comparison of both approaches. First, we will focus on the similarities between ETSAM and UTA. The first one is considering drawing as a central pedagogical tool because both schools consider drawing as the main tool in early stages of architectural education. The second one will be the studio-based learning, because learning is structured around the project-based studio environments and iterative design exercises. The third is the emphasis on transformation. Both pedagogies understand first-year education as a moment of intellectual and personal transformation in its core. Then we have the integration of analog and digital tools, although with different emphasis, both programs combine hand drawing and digital media. And the last one is the importance of critical thinking, since both approaches aim to develop students' ability to think critically and conceptually about architecture. Then we will focus on some differences between both programs. The first one is design-based versus drawing-based. UTA has a structure of an early design studio versus EDSAM that has two different courses, one dedicated to drawing and then one properly to design. The second one is the role of drawing. At some, drawing is often treated as a speculative and conceptual tool. At UTA, it has historically been more connected to representation and communication, although it's shifting towards this speculative direction. The third one is critic the dynamics. In UTA, critics are generally more structured and feedback oriented, while at EDSAM, critics are always in the context of the group and more fluid. And the last one is the structure versus autonomy. UTA tends to have more coordinated and structured curriculum in first year, while EDSAM traditionally allows greater student autonomy and ambiguity, although that is also something that is shifting. We hope you enjoyed this presentation and thank you for listening.